speakers are Jack Laskovitz, who is the Vice President of Client Success at technology company Payit, and William Eggers, who is Executive Director at Deloitte Centre for Government Insights. So we're going to hear a short presentation from each of them about the trends that they're observing in cities before going into a panel discussion later for a deeper dive on some of the issues raised. So with that, we're going to begin our first presentation from Jack. Welcome, Jack.
All right. Hey, good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are around the world. I want to make sure, Sarah, can you hear my audio okay?
Yep, I hear you.
Awesome. Well, we'll get started. So great to see you all. Jack Laskowitz from Payit. And one of the things I want to make sure to do today is to share a little bit about who we are and what we do at Payit, why we believe that digitizing these experiences for cities is so important, not only to the work that hardworking individuals do every day at agencies and departments all over the world, but also the service that we do to the residents, the constituents in which we serve. So I'll spend a few minutes just to tell you a little bit about why we believe that's important. William's got a lot of the really cool data points and a survey that they did, and really looking forward to doing a really great panel Q&A and sharing the stage with William. So who the heck is Payit? We're a 10-year-old company. We serve today over 80 million citizens or residents across North America, and have a nice sort of NASCAR logo of certifications. But what do? We believe that providing the right kind of composable technology to agencies and departments, government agencies and departments, will help take some of that, what we call unnecessary friction, out of residents transacting with their government agencies, something that they do every month, every week, every year, but something that they do at least at some point in time. And doing so in a way that is surprisingly easy. That when that happens, a lot of really good things happen. Revenue collection tends to come in faster. Efficiency, sustainability makes advances, and even better, it makes a smooth experience, or we call surprisingly easy experience for those residents. In fact, one of the things you'll hear today is that that's just a expectation that all of us have, even in our daily lives. And I believe we all would agree that that should extend into interacting with a government agency as well. And so one of the reasons why agencies choose Payit, really three main reasons. One, while it's crazy that it feels surprising at times, but really the fact that we start with a design around that end user experience has seemed a bit novel, but folks are choosing us because they are looking for, hey, if we can make a great experience in transacting or interacting with us at the user level, it has all these follow-on impacts that affect our operations. The second part is we've designed and architected this platform in a composable way, meaning that there are a lot of similar or common building blocks, but every agency, every department, every jurisdiction has their own unique characteristics in the way in which they are serving their communities. And finding and creating a platform that does this natively, one, makes it really easy, but also makes it really effective to build on those best practices. And the final piece here is, Payit is in it to win it with our agency and department partners. What that means is we've designed a business model that is success driven. So it's not a massive check at the beginning to build this archaic or monolithic structure, but rather it's a fast to deploy a set of services and features that really we win only when our agency customers win. So those are the reasons why a lot of folks are joining Payit and becoming part of this family, which is a ton of fun. This is another just example of what that means. So when we start with a really delightful or surprisingly easy user experience that's also fast to deploy, means that we're delivering value and creating value for agencies right away because those experiences are meeting them where they're at. And finally, the other thing that tends to drag down a lot of projects is a lot of this integration. There's all sorts of different systems that exist out there, and Payit believes in an open integration architecture. And so we integrate with, we're open to integrating with any back office, and we do that every day, which really lifts up a lot of burdens for our technology teams and your technology teams and your frontline operating units as well. And so what does that look like? Here you see what this consumer grade experience looks like in real life. As you can see on the left, it's a chat-based or text-based interaction. When we think about the communities and the ways in which the vast majority of individuals interact, we're all used to text messaging at this point in time. And so that is one of the most common, easy to understand, easy to use interfaces. But that's also built on and integrated with a rich, personalized dashboard experience that helps constituents get the information they need when they need it at the right time with the right information. That makes it easy for them to take the actions that you're needing them to take. And the final piece you see on the right is not only is it just that interaction, but it's the fact that you can come back again and again, and this platform, your platform that we call it with our agency partners, it remembers the right kind of information. So let's say a particular individual pays for a property tax, for example, or they pay a citation, or they pay for a water bill or a trash bill. And the next time they come back, it says, oh yeah, you want to use that same credit card you have on file? Perfect, great, click, 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 you're done. And get back to your life. And so that's where a great experience gets to. It's that efficiency. And when that efficiency happens, then the repetition starts to occur, and then you start to generate those experiences that your residents are looking to use. And here are the outcomes. That's the important part. Things go up and things go down. So things go up like digital transactions, dollars processed or collected online. The things that go down, walk-ins, mail-ins, things that are really operationally burdensome for teams. And even the kind of the icing on the cake is even when those instances where there are multiple services available for the same user, in fact, what happens is that they tend to access and purchase more services as well online. So it's easy when those things really start to meet up at that constituent user. And so that's it. That's really the quick rundown of Pay It, what we do, why we believe that. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those proof points that we see out in the world, and the fact that I think some of those things are resonating, and agencies are saying it, constituents are saying it. But that's enough from me, and love to, Sarah, I'll hand it back to you, but I know there's a little poll, and I think that'll get us set up for a great chat with William.
Thank you, Jack, and some great points in your presentation. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those in the later discussion. So to the people in the audience, you should see now in your polls section on your screen that we are running a poll. So please be prepared to vote. And we are asking what are the biggest challenges that stand in the way of improving customer service and resident access to digital government services, excuse me. So the options are lack of budget, lack of resources, including time and staff, lack of in-house expertise or not knowing where to start, outdated back-end systems that are too complex to modernize, or all of the above. So we're just going to give you a minute or so to vote now, and then we will look at the results. Jack, any predictions for what you expect to see here? Just a couple.
I predict I'll have a lot of challenges getting off mute first. You know, I think we're gonna have a pretty good mix. We see and hear all these challenges, so they're all big. That's a good non-answer, right, Sarah?
So if you're in the audience, it's your last chance to vote now. So please do so if you want to have a say. And okay, so the results are pretty much split. So lack of budget has not really been raised as an issue, but lack of resources, time and staff is equally split with all of the above. So lack of in-house expertise or not knowing where to start also hasn't been raised as an issue, and neither has outdated back-end systems which are too complex to modernize. So Jack and William, I'll just ask you for your quick takes on those findings, and then we'll go into William's research a bit more. So, Jack, does that surprise you? And I know you mentioned the all of the above, so maybe that aspect doesn't surprise you.
No, it doesn't. That's we hear a lot of that working with agencies and departments in the U.S. and Canada already. So this group is very much aligned.
And William, how about you? What are your top level takes? Because this relates fairly closely to the research that you've done. So, does the results surprise you?
Not really, and I think we're going to get into what users have said on this topic. And so, why don't we move on to the next slide?
Yep, sure.
And so, Jack, loved your presentation. Some of the words that you used, I found really aligned with the research we've done. Composable government, I love that. Friend of mine just wrote a piece for Public Administration Times on composable government and why that's so important. When we think about frictionless government, which you mentioned, what I consider the leading government in the world on digital government, Estonia, that is a big part of their goal, is just how do we make government interactions with government as frictionless as possible. And as you mentioned, Jack, from previous research I've done, is when you are able to do that, you can dramatically increase compliance, whether it's around G2B and other areas. And I wrote a piece called Compliance Without Tears, which was about how do you, by improving the user experience, how governments can also dramatically increase compliance. So resonated quite a lot with me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a new survey that we just put out where we surveyed over 5,000 users of government services around the world. And with a deep dive into the US and Canada, where I'm going to present some results. And this is a part of a series of surveys we've done. 2 years ago, we did a survey of government officials around the world who are involved in digital government, what their perceptions were. And then we decided we wanted to look at citizen perceptions and see where they were the same, where they differed, and so on. So this really gets into what the actual users believe. And so here we're looking at change in the use of government services. As we know, during the pandemic, we saw probably the biggest one-time sort of increase in digital government that we've seen in years. I've been writing about this and working in it for 25 years now, including writing 2 books on digital government. And we really were catapulted into a whole new era with the pandemic in terms of digital, especially the use of cloud and other services. And so you can see some increases here. But if I want to call your attention to on the right-hand side, how often do you interact with government through digital channels? And you see here, rarely is leading both often, always, and sometimes, which means that we still have a long way to go in terms of digital services. I wrote a book called Government 2.0 20 years ago, where at that time, a little bit really during the dot-com era, we had really estimated that we would be a little bit further than we are right now in terms of the use of digital services and digital channels. And so we still have a lot of opportunity to grow that. And let's look at the next slide. And this looks at how often you interact with different government services right now, in terms of how you would like to interact. And you see, rarely was the top, but most people we surveyed said that they would prefer interacting with government through digital applications, whether it's website, mobile applications, chatbots, so on. And even when you look at call centers here, really what we're calling call centers now is contact centers, because these call centers need to be at the really hub of the user digital experience. And when you look at omnichannel service delivery, it's that integration of contact centers and websites. So overwhelmingly, this is how people are preferring to interact with government today, but they're not right now. And you do also see in this slide that as you get closer to local levels, it increases a little bit in terms of face-to-face interactions, but still the vast majority of users prefer digital interactions, but that's not happening necessarily today. The question is why? So let's go to the next slide. What are some of the major challenges that they found? The first one is simply difficulty in navigating government websites, and that's all about the user experience. And that's something that can easily be fixed in governments. We're seeing a lot of innovations around the world, one of the biggest ones being organizing government services by life events, such as the birth of a child, the death of a loved one, you're moving into a new job, you're retiring, you're going to university. In the US, there are 9 major life events-based services that the Office of Management and Budget is pushing at the federal level, involving both different levels of government. We also see a big movement along these lines in Canada. And then you see some of the other concerns around privacy and security. And again, those are challenges the governments all over the world have been able to navigate in different ways. And what we also found was that if you provide a really good user experience and enough benefits from digital government services, that people are willing to provide more of their data, and they're more willing to see kind of government sharing data across different levels. But that user experience needs to be really good, and the benefits need to be very strong. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the major reasons why we're finding that people are very open to both using digital services, but even having a digital identity, which is really a precursor for having a seamless 360-degree user experience. You really need to have a digital identity. And in this regard, we see a number of European countries where they have a once-only approach, and they've really focused on digital identity a little bit ahead of North America in this regard. But the more people find that they're hassled by having to provide repetitive information to government time and time again, the more willing that they are and the more open they are to digital identities. Now, in North America, the way that digital identity is working for the most part is we're seeing it at the state and provincial level. States like Colorado, which have a digital driver's license, and we're seeing this happening in many different states right now. And in Canada, the British Columbia has really led the way. They started with the universal health card, and they've expanded it out as a digital identity. But really getting to where we need to be in the end, where you're providing this sort of seamless service. In Estonia, for example, you can start up a business in less than 10 minutes, provide your tax returns, and you only have to provide your information to any level of government once, and then it's shared. Getting to that really does require having a digital identity. And so that needs to be a really a major push by governments if they're really going to provide the sort of frictionless service that Jack talked about earlier. And if we go to the next slide, this looks at digital services in Canada, since there's a lot of Canadians on the call. And you see the numbers here in Canada are a little bit lower than globally, 18% compared to 25% in terms of people who regularly interact with government using digital channels. And again, what we found was that for the most part, people do want to. You see 64% of Canadians would prefer a website. And then when you add that on to some of the other digital applications here, it really is quite high right now. So a lot of opportunity for improvement and advancement in the use of digital services. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Sarah, for the next polling question.
And what residents are asking for. Our final poll is looking at government agencies have a goal of improving customer service and resident access to government services, and what are the top things that you hear your residents asking for? So the options we have are a mobile app, a digital wallet, and the ability to pay through PayPal, Venmo, Apple Pay, and similar services. Having one place for all of government business, having access to transaction history and receipts, and all of the above. So please vote now, and then we will share the results in just a moment. Just give a couple more seconds, and then we will share the results and discuss the findings. So having one place for all government business is important, followed by a split between having access to transaction history and receipts and all of the above. So, Jack, if we start with you, does this chime with what you hear from your customers?
Yeah, I'd say so. Actually, the mobile apps were very much in vogue about 10 to 12 years ago, and they still have their place, but it's an and, not an or, where a mobile app would potentially be an extension of an online user experience. We find that correlates with the frequency in which someone will interact with a particular app. If I remember correctly, I spent a lot of time in wireless. A lot of times apps have a shelf life of 6 months on your phone. And so if you're interacting with a mobile app less often than 6 months, like let's say your property tax, for example, many places that's annual or semi-annual. Anyways, you kind of get the point. And then the digital wallet components, we could talk a little bit more about, what is a digital wallet, but the PayPals, Venmos, Apple Pays, I think it's growing, and it's and folks wanting to have that as an option. But there are some of the fundamental blocking and tackling components of just exactly with what the folks here on the call said was, hey, can I just make it first easier for different pieces of doing business with the government to be in one place versus using my Venmo account all over the place? Same thing with transaction history and receipts. I know one of our clients gets a lot of calls just to say, I need a copy of this thing, and that drives a lot of operational burden for them. So yeah, I think that resonates, and I just gave a little bit of commentary on why I violently agree with the results here.
Yeah. William, what about you? What do you make of the findings? I guess they're in line with some of what you found, but...
Yeah, having one place for all government business, one of the leading governments in the world, and this is the government of Singapore, which has been a leader in digital government for 2 decades. They actually were the first ones to come up with the idea of organizing governments around life events. And there's a site and an app you can go to, which actually has over 80 different government transactions organized by life events that you can get your work done. It's one sort of a payment system, and it's widely used across the country. And the other thing you find in some of the leading governments is some integration, even with some private sector services, and even transactions you might do with your banks and other areas. I've been writing about for over 2 decades the notion of almost invisible government, where you have channel partnerships with some of the places where you do go very often, such as your bank, where you can do different government transactions there also. And I think that's a little bit where we're going in the future. And having access to transaction history and receipts, when you look at it, even from a government to business standpoint, this is a huge issue. People want to know their building permit or where it is right now, and being able to see who it's with, or if they're trying to establish a business online. Or we see that certainly with our taxes, and IRS has made a lot of progress in trying to get us to that point where we can see exactly where we are, because the last thing people want is to think that their application or something is buried somewhere in a bureaucracy. So those are 2 really, really critical elements, and we do see governments all over the world have made huge strides in that over the last few years.
Great. And before we move on to the next question, just related to this, I'm just wondering for both of you how you see governments understanding what their residents really do want, and maybe co-designing the services with them to make sure that they're built around the people that are going to use them. Do either of you, Jack? What about you?
Yeah, I see it happen in pockets. In fact, I'll offer a suggestion. So, and by the way, just as a background, I've worked across with Payit's existing customers for a number of years now. So I'm very fortunate to enjoy being on the ground with with these agencies and departments all over North America. So I'm gonna have some stories to tell. One of those stories is we had a city in the upper Midwest in the U.S. and they did two things. So one, they first needed to measure what actually people are trying to do, and right to what William's talking about in terms of life events, they created personas and described life events that persona was going through. So same thing, like they moved or there's a major change in the family, and that required some interaction with this city government. And what they did was they worked across with the local university that had a marketing research class and said, "Hey, we could use your help." And that was easy, for that class to jump in and they would be essentially put on that persona and then just try to navigate the existing website and digital services to give feedback to that city. And I remember talking to the city treasurer. He said, "You got to be ready for a lot of honesty." But that helped them understand where they were doing well, where they weren't. One of the data points was they said not only did they do that, but they tagged a lot of their website, and they found that 80% of the visits they were getting were from people trying to either pay something or find out how to pay something. So that gave them a lot of focus in terms of where they were going to begin their enhancements of their design to meet those users where they're at in a way that was intuitive and helped them navigate those particular items. So just to highlight anecdotally, at least, and some of the ways in which folks can do some co-designing, but testing that with folks that aren't experts in how to pay something or the nth detail on like a property tax, for example, really helps ground everybody in terms of what's the real world experience that's going to occur or is occurring at that point in time.
Yeah, definitely. And William, what are you seeing there about how governments can understand what it really is that how their residents do want to interact in their city and that type of thing?
Yeah, I think and we've written extensively about this in our government trends publications, which come out once a year. And one of our trends from last year looked at government for all the people. It was one of our major themes. And looking at that, and how do you, for one of the trends looked at digital access for all, which is how do you ensure equity in digital service delivery. And that gets to the point about improving digital access availability, affordability, adoption, to bridge these digital divides and to really understand how the different populations want to interact with government, what's important to them. In Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries, been doing a lot of work along these lines with Indigenous populations and really focused on that from a persona perspective and how do you increase equity through co-creation and even looking at the data sets that are available. Another piece of this that's important is inclusive engagement. And that's where you're having digital communications for much richer community connection, where you're building trust, driving inclusive engagement, reimagining different ways of communicating with users, focusing on how to engage marginalized communities, looking at new mediums. And that gets to what Jack mentioned earlier, which is a lot of listening, doing journey mapping, persona development, and so on. Because if you look at the trajectory of digital government, we moved from 20 years ago, kind of a one-size-fits-all approaches, moving on the way towards more personalization. ultimately, where we're going to be getting to is what we call a government for one, which is very, very personalized delivery, where you get what you need when you need it, and you have access to it in the way that you want to interact with government through an omnichannel delivery piece. Very few governments are there right now. Some leading governments I mentioned, Estonia, Singapore, have been moving towards that direction and doing some really interesting things. But on the way there is something where you're focused much more on customer segmentation here, which is critical, where different people interact with government differently. So whether seniors might interact very differently and have a different sort of approach and needs than younger users, and then you look at different populations and geographies. We now have the ability to really tailor government services towards all of those different needs of individuals in a way we never could have done, say, 20 years ago when e-governments really started in a big way.
Yeah, thank you. So sort of related to this as well, a major barrier to adoption that your research highlighted, William, was difficult to navigate websites. This might be a bit surprising that that's still an issue. So I just wondered, how you both see that. How can we fix this, fairly fundamental thing? Jack, what are your thoughts on improving websites to get us started?
Yeah, there's a quote we've got an adoption study as well. A lot of it reinforces the work that William and his team have done. I think it's actually one of our handouts. But there's a quote that was in there that someone said, like, I got to make sure to be patient and schedule enough time to be ready to go. Like they're like sort of psyching themselves up to to go on that journey around that website. It reinforces some of the things that that city did in terms of their study. But I would suggest that it's a lot, and a lot of I remember talking to some local governments, and they have 100 different services, whether you need to get a dog license or register a new business or anything between. And what we recommend and what we see is, it's that boil the ocean piece, like really try to focus on what are the things that are going to give you impact and scale first. And so our recommendations have been start there and then begin to grow out where you've got really a lot of folks that are establishing that identity or that access with that local government, for example, and then you can begin to add on additional services. What the common item though that we tend to see is, well, let's start at somewhere really safe. That's very much infrequent, and the challenge that I totally understand that, right? Like it's like we're afraid to fail, and even if that's done well, folks forget about it because it's also really infrequent. Where we see agencies and departments and local governments do really well is that they find out what is the front door to their government, where are people interacting with them the most, and starting there, like your 80-20 rule, starting there starts to get that momentum built and building without getting weighed down about trying to solve everything at one time. So that would be one of the components that I would recommend in terms of working through those hard to navigate websites. We get it, and it's challenging, right? So what the question I would ask back is where can you have the biggest impact, and then use those items that we've talked about, work from that user's point of view, do some testing, measure, and then tweak that as you go along.
Definitely. And William, did your finding about difficult to navigate websites putting people off surprise you? And what do you suggest, or what progress are you seeing there in improving that?
Well, it wasn't necessarily a surprise. I think what it really shows is that a focus on CX, customer experience, needs to really be at the center of the digital journey, and it can't be just a compliance exercise. It really needs to be a key strategic point. What we found a number of things. First of all, when people do have great experiences in government services, you end up actually dramatically increasing trust. We've done in this survey of digital citizen, we also did another one looking at trust and digital services at the state, federal level and local level. And what we found is the number one factor in terms of what the correlation between trust in state and local government was actually their experience with digital services. For those individuals that had great digital experiences, they had higher levels of trust, and vice versa. So it really shows how important it is to the mission and the overall view of trust in government. So one of the areas, I've mentioned life events and starting to organize services by life events. In the UK, and you used to have to, if you had the death of a loved one, you used to have to contact the central government and the local government authority up to 44 times to complete the task, ranging from canceling passports to stopping pensions. So they adopted a once-only approach for death notification and administering an estate. It notifies up to 30 different government services, saving the government estimated £20 million a year. But most importantly, 98% of citizens in the UK surveyed felt favorably about their experience of the Tell Us Once service. So they actually experienced, during a very, very difficult time, that made some of it a little bit less difficult through this sort of an approach, which was really based on what do people need. And so getting to that level first and understanding what those needs are can become really, really important. And what we've known for decades now is, from a digital standpoint, we shouldn't be organizing government services according to the way that they're organized in the boxes from a government perspective. As Jack noted, they need to be organized really from a user's perspective. That's what life event services is all about. That's what personalized services is all about, is really saying, what do people need? How do they want to interact? Understanding their needs and their pain points, and then solving those. And again, that takes some hard work of doing the journey mapping and persona development and really understanding what those pain points were. But we have a lot of data on that right now. And then you could start increasing adoption, increasing trust in government.
Yeah, brilliant. So we've discussed throughout this discussion really that a good digital service is about more than just making an analog process digital. So if a government is going to start with a service, getting a business license or accessing childcare subsidies or whatever it is, how would you encourage them to think through it so that they really are designing a good digital service and not just digitizing something? So what are the fundamental things that they should consider? Jack, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, start with what's the goal? And I've run across it where we're engaging with a particular agency or department, and we ask them, hey, we want to make sure that we're aligned. What are you working to accomplish? And not to name names, sometimes there's like a panicked look in the face of the individual running this project. They're like, it's like we're not here to just take this paper form and put it online, or take this paper process and put it online. But really, and it's worth the 20 minutes sometimes to say, like, what does success look like? There's a lot of different tools to do that. Sometimes you can, write what's the press release that you're going to have when you launch the service is just a good exercise to go through. But I would start before doing any major work is describe what success looks like. And it's a great way to check yourself in terms of, am I trying to perpetuate the kind of just a nicer version of what we have today, or am I really making some sort of meaningful impact? A good example is there's a social service that we support down in the state of Alabama, and it was a total paper process. And so this was individuals seeking social services, and it required them to go to a county office to have one or a number of meetings. And the persona of this population, we're talking hours on buses or walking, et cetera, to or taking off of work to get to these offices. And so it was not just bringing the services online. And this happened, thankfully, we launched it right at the beginning of 2020. But immediately when that service went online, more than 50% of the applications for these social services started to occur online, because it was saving hours of time of that community and the people that were seeking those social services just to get there, get through the process. And so that sort of just highlights, okay, they're really looking for making things easier to actually help more people get access.
Yeah, definitely. And William, what is your take on the fundamentals for designing a good digital service rather than just digitizing something?
Well, this is something I've been writing about for quite a long time. And when we look back in the eGov era, the .com era, at that time, what governments were doing mostly was putting up a Hollywood storefront in the terms of a website. There was very little in terms of redesigning back-end processes or anything like that. And we didn't have all the technology to do so, resources and so on. With cloud computing and so on, we have the ability to do all of that now, to go far beyond that. And I wrote a piece a number of years ago called, "What if government services work like Amazon?" And what would that mean? What would it look like to be able to interact in that way? And there's really three crucial elements, and we've touched on some of these before. The first one is you need to have an end-to-end digital experience that's developed from the customer's point of view, accessible anywhere, so omnichannel, anytime, and from any device. Secondly, you need a unique, uniform digital ID that grants agencies access to the appropriate data and services. And then three, you need mechanisms that allow agencies to share data across the enterprise, but increasingly often with the private providers also of different services, because certainly in North America, when you look at most human services that Jack mentioned, it's nonprofit providers, sometimes for-profit providers that are actually on the ground providing that service. And so you need to be able to integrate with them accordingly in order to have that sort of thing. So you need those three key elements. And once you get those in place, then you can start moving up the spectrum of what we call a personalization spectrum. And that's going from one size fits all approach to customer segmentation, where you are targeting by demographic groups, elderly, low income, or veteran, or geographic targeting by region, by zip code. And then you're moving up that spectrum towards a more personalized, proactive service delivery. And that's around life events or suggested services, such as if you qualify for X, you may also benefit from Y, which is around integrated eligibility. And then towards a government for one, where you have individual design, fully tailored, individually customized, and personalized based on express preferences, for example, by text or by email or by phone. And a really important thing here is that with what we've seen with generative AI and so on, you're going to be able to transform just about all of your processes, speed them up considerably. We actually are looking at 10x improvements in many of these different processes. And so it's going to be much more of a system where less navigation involved, where the individual user has to navigate through websites and so on. And it's going to be much more query and prompt oriented. I need to do this. I'm eligible for this. Can you sign me up for this? So think about it much more voice activated, talking to a chatbot, a digital assistant, and getting your services done that way. We're rapidly moving into that as a future. People are going to be expecting that. So when you look at citizen expectations, so how do we incorporate Gen AI into all of these different elements of digital services? That's certainly going to be a massive focus of government and the private sector over the next few years.
Definitely. And Jack, how do you see that governments can take their inspiration from consumer digital services, and also what's different about government digital services?
Sure. Well, I haven't bought toilet paper yet from government services. So that's the first thing. But I would say that the first part is that we can take from, and one of the things that we do is that whole remember me aspect in it, obviously in a secure and safe way. But what that means is, to what William pointed out earlier, where there's a lot of like re-entry of information, which violates one of the most common one of the most fundamental design principles, which is never ask a user to give you information you already know or should know. And so what we find is just starting there, where the first time of providing that information, it should be the only time. A good example is, a lot of us here either are working in a place that is taking in property taxes, or many folks pay property taxes, or they live somewhere that pays the property taxes. And that's an experience where folks aren't moving every year. I think the average is about 5 to 7 years. So the next time that someone goes in to pay a property tax, wouldn't it be nice if that information was remembered? And when those common things happen, it's delightful in the sense of like, oh, it's great. In fact, we did a property tax campaign last fall, and it was quite interesting. Found the next day, I found on Twitter someone had said, "Hey, I just got this email, and I paid my property taxes." That was that was it on the tweet. And I'm like, okay, buckle up, everybody. But then the following comments was, "This was so easy. I was able to get it done in 3 clicks during the commercial of the hockey game." This is an NHL city, and then the comments below it was like, "Yeah, surprisingly easy." And I've never. I always ask folks, raise your hand when you've seen, a Twitter conversation admiring, good technology, good user experience for a government experience. Yeah. So I think that part of it is individuals have been conditioned that government services should be different. And the question that a lot of us would pose is, should it? It doesn't necessarily have to be. However, there are special, I think, considerations that continue to need to be done in terms of that data and the privacy. So yeah. This is not things that can be buried into, deep into the terms and conditions kind of a deal, but rather this is, to William's point, this is a interaction of trust. And when it goes well, it goes really well, but also, it can be, if not done well or thoughtfully, can continue to perpetuate challenging experiences.
Definitely. And I just want to remind the audience, if you want to send any questions in, we can take a couple more. So one thing I wanted to ask you about is we're seeing some cities and states set up dedicated digital services teams or chief digital services officers. I just wondered, do you think this is becoming more important, and why, I suppose? So Jack, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is. I've seen it pop up in a number of places. It really gives a voice to a common element across organizations. And so I find that one becomes a signal in the organization that this is important to that city, that county, that province, that state. The advice that I would offer, and the folks that I know that work in those organizations would offer, is sometimes it can be viewed, the pitfall could be, is that can be viewed as like a group that doesn't own anything, right? They're kind of just in everyone else's business. And so there's a lot of really important stakeholdering internally to highlight the fact that, hey, there's a shared success model here to make sure that the digital experience organization is one of enablement and not one of constraint or of territorialism. So those are the things that I think maybe don't get said a lot, but would really be worth when designing and establishing that, which I think should happen. It should also just be done with a mind toward, here are the things that we want to make sure to guard against so that we are optimally successful.
Yeah. And Sarah, I was going to just jump on what can we learn from commercial? We've certainly hit on some of them: personalization, frictionless experience, universal digital identity, omnichannel. But one of the areas we haven't talked about yet is what we call anticipatory government. And that's where government anticipates needs and potential problems based on data analysis, just as Netflix anticipates your wants and queuing a new video and personalized platforms. We're seeing is a lot of movement towards anticipating what people will need and then offering proactive digital delivery where the user actually doesn't have to initiate anything for the transaction to occur. One of the areas we're seeing that happening is around family benefits around the world. We saw that actually during the pandemic in the US with the tax credit that IRS gave out, which went automatically into people's bank accounts. But in many countries right now, they're moving towards this proactive service delivery. So an example in Estonia, previously 97% of parents had to apply for one or more of 10 types of family benefits linked to the life event of a child being born. And to get the allowance, parents would have to provide details and supporting documents. They'd have to go through forms. It could take about 2 hours of manual time to process each application. Now, however, they have a proactive family benefit service where parents don't even have to apply to receive any of the family benefits, making it a frictionless experience. The country has an automated IT system that sends a query to the Estonian National Population Register every night to get data on new births and names of newborn children. And this system fetches the data for eligible parents from various data systems. And the money is after they've said, yes, you have qualified for it and so on. And once parents just hit the confirm button, the money is automatically transferred to their accounts. The process, which used to take hours, now takes about 30 seconds. And it's an example of this proactive service delivery where when governments have this kind of information already, there's really no reason for an individual to have to go through the whole process of actually applying for it. So this notion of proactive anticipatory delivery is something that we see in the private sector all the time. And increasingly, I think that's going to be a cornerstone of a lot of digital government service delivery.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's an interesting angle, definitely. So we're coming to the end now. So I just wanted to ask you both a summarizing question. So obviously it's quite a long and complicated journey for governments to get where they need to be. Where would you suggest they start to make this a manageable process? William, we'll go with you first.
Well, first, I think they need to see where they are on the spectrum right now. And what we've looked at is the spectrum from beginning digital all the way to being digital. And so along those spectrum, you've got beginning digital. Most governments are past the digital storefronts and websites. Doing digital is the next stage. And that's deploying customer experience and having a lot of things available digitally. But the problem with just doing digital is you could end up in an endless loop of doing digital things rather than making changes to their digital mindset, service delivery, and operating models. And so the next stage is becoming digital. And that's where you're fully digitizing some services. Some are still hybrid. You're using advanced changes that are made to delivery process and operations and so on. But you still lack the cognitive intelligence to enable continual improvement. And really being digital is where you have the human elevated, you've got human-centered design and advanced technologies like AI and cyber and cloud. They're used to radically improve service delivery by transforming government operating models. And that's, I think, the goal is to figure out where you are in the process and how do you get from doing digital to being digital. And again, I'm going to emphasize that generative AI is going to play a major role in that going forward, because it is going to enable the transformation of just about all the sort of back-end processes we see right now in government today.
Excellent. And Jack, closing from you, what do you see as the sort of fundamentals and low-hanging fruit to make this a manageable process?
Yeah. I totally agree. Measure, kind of get a sense of where you are and where you want to go. But then what we believe is in the theme of launch and then iterate. So don't let the pursuit of perfection be the enemy of good in terms of making progress now. So, my recommendation is what's the first step? Find a first step, find a first meaningful step. And then once that occurs, there's a momentum component that there will always be a destination to get to. I would recommend find the ways that you can make an impact today, meaningful. What are the scale interaction points that as an agency or as a jurisdiction you have with your constituents or your residents, and really do something to start there, because once that gets started, and it doesn't have to be a complete rebuild, but what's the interaction point that can make some progress? And then as that progress gets made, it's a lot easier to do the next thing and then the next thing and the next thing.
Brilliant. So thank you both so much for your presentations and your insights today. Just want to remind the audience that you can access the handouts that are related to some of the things that we've discussed today. If you have any further questions for our panelists or comments, please do send them in, and we'll try to respond to them after the webinar. And we will send the recording of today's event out by email. So thank you very much to everyone who's attended.